Howdy, howdy. Today I've been studying a little bit of Chronicles, and the book of Chronicles is kind of like a recap of a lot of what happens in First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings. It's just more from the position of like the kingdom of Judah, like the southern tribe, or when Israel's together. It doesn't really focus too much on like the northern side once the kingdom split. But I was coming across something that kind of, was making me think, kind of making my head fire. Because if you go to Chronicles 10, talks about the death of Saul and his sons. It says the Philistines fought against Israel, and Israel's men fled from them. Many were killed at Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons and killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. I don't know if I said that right. When the battle intensifies against Saul, the archers spotted him and severely wounded him. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through with it, or these uncircumcised men will come and torture me." But his armor bearer would not do it because he was terrified. Then Saul took his sword and fell on it. His armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, and he fell on his sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died. The whole house died together. When all the men of Israel in the valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled. So the Philistines came and settled in them. So, in the end, when it's talking about that, it goes on about how the Philistines took their bodies and whatnot. And it says, Saul died for his unfaithfulness to the Lord because he did not keep the Lord's word. He even consulted a medium for guidance, but he did not inquire of the Lord. So the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse, which was foretold anyway. And the reason I read that is just kind of like recap what my mind was thinking at the time. Because if you go back to 1 Samuel, Saul started off very humble at first when he was selected king. He was kind of based king off sight. Everyone saw he was like a head higher than everyone else. That's a big dude. It's a big dude. And, at first when they wanted to anoint him king, he was hiding among like the luggage. He's like, I don't want to be king. He was hiding and they had to go find him. And when he did win his victory finally, like you go flash forward and he's in the field, tilling the field. So he's not even doing kingly things, even though he was anointed king. All Israel kind of just went back to their homes and it was just another day. But when I think it was the Philistines came up against them, Philistines, and they're like telling Saul, dude, we need to do this. We need to take care of business. He rallied all of Israel, but when they found him, he was in his field, caring for his field. He went back to just a normal, humble life after he was anointed king. It didn't get to his head. It didn't really change anything for him at first. But after that victory, you kind of see where it shifts because he starts building statues to himself. And there's this part right here where it's talking about Saul's failure. They're up at Gilgal, and they're getting ready to go up against the Philistines. And there's a sacrifice they're going to do to the Lord to give them victory in battle, more or less, or whatnot. So they're supposed to wait for Samuel to do the sacrifice. Well, Samuel's not there. He's a little bit late, and Saul's looking at the clock. He's like, dude, let's just do this. I'll do the sacrifice. He does it, and right when he finishes, if he would just waited 20 more minutes, here comes Samuel's like, well, dude, what are you doing? You didn't wait for me. And he's like, oh, well, I saw that the warriors were over there. They were coming down, and, we needed strength, so I did the burnt offering. And when Samuel's like, dude, you shouldn't have done that. He's like, well, it was the men, they were rallying against me, and they just, what was I supposed to do? They wanted the sacrifice. I gave it to them, And the whole point of that, I think, is, Saul was refusing to see his wrongdoing, was refusing to acknowledge where he needed to improve. And that was the biggest thing about Saul. It says David was a man after God's own heart. It's not like he had the same heart as God. He had a heart who was a man that wanted to please God's heart. When he saw things and he was confronted with things, he's like, you know what? This isn't about me. This is about the bigger picture. And he was able to confess and repent his sins. And he did some big mistakes. Adultery, murder. David did a lot of bad things, but, in the end, he knew when he was wrong, and he wasn't willing to separate his relationship with God by making excuses like, well, God, she was bathing on the roof naked. What was I supposed to do? There's a moment of accountability when it comes to David versus Saul. There's never accountability. And you can read through it and you'll see all of Saul's failures. And God showed him time and time again, Saul, this isn't going to happen your way. When Saul got jealous of David because people were singing David's praise, he killed his 10,000. Saul killed thousands. He's like, dude, the people love David more than me. What am I supposed to do? The kingdom was already destined to go to him. And it was kind of well known because even if you go to Chronicles, when all the people come to David, they're like, hey, it was prophesied that you were going to be king. So everyone knew. It was common knowledge. It wasn't like Saul was out of the loop on that. But he wanted to hold on. And so he chased David around spent years leaving his home country and chasing after David over foreign lands. And when you go back to Chronicles 10, it's the Philistines are who did Saul in. They're the ones who he was fighting against, and the whole time, honestly, they were building power. The whole time he was chasing David around, all those years, he was ignoring the Philistines. He was ignoring a problem in his life in Israel, in order to pursue his own deceitful desires or his own wants, and whatever the case, however you want to view it. And so that was kind of like the whole thing was coming to me. I was like, okay, I'm thinking that, and I'm reading this, how he's on there, and I kind of feel bad for him. And people go, oh, dude, you shouldn't feel bad for Saul. I do, because I feel like I relate a little bit. And I think anyone can, if you're being honest with yourself, is, there's a saying like, are you going to die on that hill? That's a big saying. It means, are you going to make a stand there? And that's where you're deciding to make your stand, where you're giving up everything else to make your stand right there and then. And when you think about it, it's like talking about they're fighting on Mount Gilboa. And they're in my mind when I'm reading this, he's running up a mountain, he's getting away, their fighting's intense. He's looking down, he can see his sons, and the sons get slaughtered, and he's like, crap, and he keeps going up, and he can just see this army coming at him. He can see the people coming at him. He's like, dude, I'm gonna die. Draw the sword, run himself through. And I can only imagine, like, the moment he decided to run himself through, he didn't want to be tortured, or whatever the case the Philistines might have done to him. He's like, dying here is way better than whatever they're gonna do to me. But I would have to think, and I'm not saying there is, but I mean, from my perspective, trying to put myself in those shoes, there had to be a moment of like a second, when bad things are happening sometimes, or like major things, like time slows down, like perspective wise, and I can imagine you're at the top of this hill, your sons are murdered, you look out over the valley, and your enemies are overtaking you. And that's key too, is your enemies are overtaking you, and you're on that hill, and that's the hill you die on, and it's, you die on that hill because your choices. And even at the end it says, Saul died for his unfaithfulness to the Lord, because he did not keep the Lord's word. That's the hill he chose to die on. His hill was not choosing the Lord's word. And so in all perspective, is like his whole life led to this moment. These little choices he made, these selfishnesses, the things he wasn't able to acknowledge or fix in his own life. It's like he would rather have spent decades chasing David around than just acknowledging, like, hey, this is it, God. There's nothing. God gave me this kingdom. There's nothing I can do to keep this kingdom in my hands. He's fighting against a force you can't fight against. And he should have known that every time he went to battle and won against the Philistines, or did something that's like, this isn't within our power to do, and God gave him the win. But he decided to fight against that force. And like, so I'm hearing things lately, and conversations, and I'm not going to name names or nothing like that, but I'm just going to speak about a conversation or a process that came to my mind recently. An individual, he's, messing around behind his wife's back, and, his wife is miserable. All he does is complain about his wife whenever they're around, or he's just, if you're looking at him, he's just swiping on Tinder on his phone. It's like, man, and he's negative, always negative, and and sometimes you're gonna come across those people, and it's like you just want to sit them down and have that talk with them, like, hey man, this is the hill you're choosing to die on. You can tell me all day till you're blue in the face how miserable your marriage is, but look at your behaviors, like talking to these other females behind your wife's back, messing around with these other people behind your mom's back, your wife's back, and on Tinder or Instagram swiping on things and liking photos. It's like you're surrounding yourself with everything that's opposite of the situation you're complaining about. Your marriage is in shambles right now because you're refusing to work on it. I once knew a guy that was kind of juggling two people at once, and I remember telling him, like, man, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you can't water two flowers at once. You can water one over here and it will grow, or you can water one over here, it will grow, but you can't do both at the same time. If someone's going to get hurt, something's going to wither and die in that situation. And if this side is over here withering and you're complaining, oh, well, this person isn't doing this for me, that person's not doing that for me, that's because you've been watering over here. It's withering here because you're watering over here. You got to water the garden you're in. You can't water two gardens, you can't water two flowers, however you want to put it. And it made me reflect even in times in my own marriage where things weren't so well with my wife, and going back, all those times that me and my wife struggled, there was hills that I wanted to die on. I was like, this is my decision. I'm not doing anything different. This is just how it's going to have to be. And it wasn't until I submitted to God, it wasn't until I was like, you know what, Lord, this isn't the path you have for me. This isn't what you want me to do. There's no way I can justify this. And like, when we're in the midst of those seasons of sin, we can justify all types of different things. We can say, well, yeah, but maybe this is just something God's put me through. Maybe it's just show me a new door because this one's closing. It's like, no, that's what you want. That's what your heart wants. And that's why you're justifying it any way you can. You're not taking accountability for your own actions. It's like whenever you're struggling in life, whether it's school, work, marriage, parenting, friendships, whatever. It's like, don't, oh, this person didn't do this, or that person didn't do that. And it's, if you always have a reason as to why those are failing, and it's a repetitive, cycle in your life, maybe you're the problem. Maybe there's some accountability you need to take. Maybe I could have done this better. Maybe I could have done that better. It's there's things you can do. Where you put your attention at is different. If you're sitting around playing video games, and in the meantime, your kids are just running amok and they're not behaving, you're like losing it. Like, oh, why don't these guys ever listen? Well, because you're always on video games and you're not paying attention to them. This is the only way they can try to get your attention. And or same with your wife. Could be playing video games and there's your wife and she's like, hey, I'm right here. Well, I want to play my games. I need to relax and stuff. Like, yeah, but you married a person and you got into that relationship to be with them and to build a life with them, and you can't split off and do your own things all the time. I'm not saying you can't have hobbies and you can't do things, but isn't an idol in your life? Is it overtaking your time? Is it affecting your family? Those are things you have to look at. Is it affecting your relationship with God? Are you moving away from God? If what I find in my life, and this could be true in other people's lives, maybe not, when I'm in sync with God, everything's kind of in place. Whether it's my eating, whether it's my exercising, whether it's my finances. When I'm in sync with God, things tend to work out. The moment I get out of sync, things start to fall apart. And it's not that God is punishing you. People are like, well, God punishes you if you don't follow his way. No, the thing is he knows the right way. He tells you the right way, and you want to do it your way. Fine, he'll let you do it your way, but it's going to fall apart. And he can see that. God knows that. He'll let it fall apart for you. He'll let you go through that. If that's what you want, if you're like, hey, God, this is what I'm choosing. I think I know better. I'm going to do it my way, and it's going to work out. And God's like, okay, I'll be here when you're done and ready to move this way. And that's the thing, though. Back to the whole hills you die on. When it comes to your marriage, is that a hill you're willing to die on? Are you willing to, not acknowledge your own things up on that hill with your sword in the ground, ready to fall on it as your enemy overtakes you? Are you letting your enemy get that close to you? It's like, think of all Saul built up, his sons. He probably thought, I'm not going to let David have this kingdom. I'm going to have sons. They're going to have sons. We're going to rule this like a monarchy. And that falls down right in front of him. All three of his sons are sliced down right in front of him. It's like, man, that's wild. Everything you built, all your dreams on that second, just a brief second that he was probably looking overseeing everything at once. His kids are dying, these enemies overtaking him. And he's like, there's only one choice I have, and I have to fall on that sword. That's the hill he chose to die on. And at that moment, he had to have a realizing moment, I would think, at least I think I would, where it's like, you know what, God, you're right. You're right. But here it's like, at the very end of it, it says that, so the Lord put him to death. And it says, but he did not inquire of the Lord. It doesn't say, here's this. So Saul died for his unfaithfulness to the Lord because he did not keep the Lord's word. He even consulted a medium for guidance, but he did not inquire of the Lord. It's like, even in that last second of his life, did he just fall to his knees on that hill? Oh God, what have I done? And acknowledge it. Who knows what he did and how it turned out. But it just got me thinking about those hills you die on. And in my life, I have lost a lot because I've chosen to die on hills. And it's not like the end all be all. In Saul's case, that was the end of his life, but it was a lot of small decisions that led to that moment. And that was the choices he made, the bed he made, he lied in it, and there's a lot of choices I made in my life where God has given me these big blessings and I have squandered them away, and it hasn't come back to me, or it hasn't changed. And sometimes there's consequences moving forward when you live on your own, you make your own choices. There's consequences to your actions. I know a lot of people nowadays don't want to think that everyone should have consequences for your actions, but unfortunately, that's just the way of life. Everything you do has it. If you have a puppy and you love it so much, you squeeze it to death and it dies. That's a consequence. You can't take certain things back in your life. And that's a very strange example, I know, but I'm just trying to be as fluffy and kind as possible in making that analogy, because I've lost some big things where it's like I could have had this situation and I did so much things I ended up in this situation. Maybe not as good, but it's still a blessing, and God's brought me here. And I'm not perfect. I don't live in sync with God all the time. I don't constantly get into my word like I should. And I know when it starts causing that issue. I know when I start having other things overtake my life, and it's like, wow, I need to really get with God again and seek his face, seek his guidance, and inquire of the Lord, because what I'm doing isn't working, and I don't want to die on any hills anymore. I want to submit all the way. I don't want to be broken. You know, when you're training a horse, you have a bridle in its mouth, and when you're first training the horse, you got to pull which way you want the horse to go, and it's a painful process. And that's what you need to do. The horse fights it, and when they become broke, that means they no longer need you to pull that. They just need a gentle touch of the reins. So, you know, when you first get the horse, you have a bit in its mouth, and you're pulling it to go which way you want it to go. And eventually it can fight, it can buck, it can do whatever it wants, but eventually it has to go that way. And when a horse is finally broken, you no longer have to pull, you have the reins, and you just gently have to pull the rein and touch the side of the horse's mouth, and the horse knows, okay, this is the way that I need to go. And a lot of times, I think people view broken as you have to be like this. When God wants you broken, he just wants you like down on your knees, your life's falling apart, broken. I think broke or broken refers to that analogy. I think he's looking for you to understand those gentle touches and be able to turn that way versus trying to put the bit in your mouth and pull back. And eventually, if you're too wild, he might just let you go do your thing, and that's a hill you're gonna have to die on. So that's just my thoughts. Nothing major. I'm not like professing any kind of like scholarly knowledge coming out of that. I just was, as I was reading Chronicles 10, the death of Saul and his sons, that was kind of reflecting on 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Saul's and David's life, the differences, and just all Saul chose to do. I actually feel bad for him because even though, you know, he disobeyed the Lord, yes, but like I was like, man, I feel that, and I remember when I was in those shoes, and I remember when I was doing those things, and it's more heartbreaking that this person couldn't turn back, this person couldn't find their way back. And I think that's the whole point of the gospel when it comes to, like, you know, tell people about Jesus Christ, you know, because it breaks your heart when you see a person, you learn their struggles, and they end up separated from God, you know. And that's the whole point of Jesus. You don't have to live separated from God. God gave his only son to save people. For God gave his only son, anyone who believes may be saved. You know, you got to believe in Jesus Christ and don't accept that separation from God. Accept the free gift that God gave you, which is Jesus Christ, and share that news. You know, I don't want to ever come across Sauls in my life where it's like, man, I'm watching this person unwind. In the Bible, you can read it from a distance, and it's like, man, it's already done and past. But sometimes we're watching it unfold, like people cheating on their wives in front of you, and you're like, look, my guy, I don't want to come off holier than thou, but I'm telling you, there's a very bad path you're going down. It's going to lead to a lot of people getting hurt. And then tell him about that Jesus that can save your life, save your marriage, just like it saved mine. That's all I can really say to that. So those are just my thoughts. Strange video, I know, but I just wanted to get it out there and share. Hope everyone's having a blessed day.